Hey guys, I'm Vulture Culture. In tonight's live stream, we're going to be answering the question, is the Moog Source from 1981 a legendary synthesizer? So in tonight's live stream, we're going to cover a bunch of stuff. We're going to start with just the sounds of the synthesizer. I'm going to try my best to shut up and just play some really cool sounds. Then we'll cover some of the history of the synthesizer, its reputation, its price at release versus how the price is today because of inflation, what you can get one of these bad boys for nowadays, what you can expect to pay. And then the crowning jewel of this podcast, we are going to do the Legendary Synthesizer Test, a test painstakingly created by members of this channel as well as myself to determine exhaustively where a synthesizer sits in the pantheon of classic synthesizers. So welcome if it's your first time here. We do this live stream every Wednesday night, and I'm very excited to be checking out this Moog synthesizer. So let's just start with the first sound I have here, and I've got this little plucky thing. And you can hear some of the features right away. We've got portamento, and we have this wonderful ladder filter. Welcome to the stream, Rob. And of course, we could drop that down the octave and create those incredible mini Moog bass sounds. And I should say real quick before I keep going in the stream, if you like the sounds from the intro, it's actually from a sample pack I created from the Moog Source. So it's got the 15 presets the synth came with, as well as the Blue Monday bassline sound I created, and then 9 other patches I created myself for a total of 425 wave files and the 25 sound fonts to load into your favorite sample. All of that for $10. Link is in the description or the pinned comment below. But yeah, this is one of the sounds that I sampled, and I think one of the best examples of why you probably need a Moog in your life is that incredible ladder filter. Nothing else sounds like a Moog ladder filter. And just that incredibly deep bassline sound. Here's another one I like a lot. Bit of Big Sky on that. Yes, Space Capsule. This is pre-MIDI, 1981. MIDI came out in 82. And Pliskin, welcome to the stream. Does the knob adjust to the parameter that is selected? Yes, that's correct. So this is one of the first, if not the first synthesizer to use this format. So obviously it's got this wonderful Miami Vice paint job. And the way it works is you just press whatever you want on the membrane panel, and then this knob controls that parameter. And unlike a lot of the synths that came after, like the Alpha Juno, the SX series from Kawai, a bunch of other synths like that, the JXs and things, this knob feels great. And it's really fun to program. Some of that is aided by the fact that this is a very simple synthesizer. Let's really push it. So you can also hear, because this isn't MIDI, we've got much better resolution on this knob. So you don't hear it stepping through 127 values, right? And the membrane's holding up great. I don't know what it is about this membrane panel in particular, but it happens to be that most people report that these synthesizers' membrane panels are in great condition. Yes, I actually have this one up on Reverb right now for $2,300, but there is one cheaper for $2K. And we'll get into the price of these synthesizers later on in the stream before we get into the Legendary Synthesizer Tests. So here's some more sounds. I'm going to turn down the reverb just a bit. I had it really cranked up for the intro. This interval control here is really powerful for shaping the sound. You can take things from, and I want you to pay attention to this incremental value. So even on the value of 0, there's a lot of range in there that, you know, is different. So the thing about this synth is the sound is really just, you know, it's incredible. And that's because internally it's a mini Moog. There's a couple of minor differences, but unlike the other Moog synths that came out around the time, like the Realistic Concert Mate, the Prodigy, and the Rogue, this is truly the successor to the Moog. A lot of people don't realize that, the successor to the mini Moog, I should say. A lot of people don't realize this was when they stopped making mini Moogs in 80. They started putting those same parts in Moog sources. So the fact that you can get this synth right now for $2,300, this very synth underneath my fingertips, is very good when you consider many Moogs, vintage mini Moogs, that is, go for 10 grand. So comparing it, it's the last affordable Moog. Here's some more sounds. Stream. How's it going? Bobby Castaneda, how's it going? Oh, the envelope's the same. So I believe these are Z80 digital envelopes, but I could be wrong about that. It's hard for me to know if the digital control is just over the values to save to memory, but they're analog envelopes. or if they're software generated. I'm not exactly sure. I think they could be, they sound awfully analog. And I believe the Z80 was used in some other synths around the time. Again, 81 is really early, before digital was really taking over. We have key tracking. Yeah, super cool. Big fan of the Rogue and Prodigy, but they both do not have all of the sound shaping features of the Source. Of course, we also have things like a full-fledged sequencer, digitally generated. I know the sample and hold is completely digital, which makes me think the envelopes probably are analog. I think I misspoke earlier, the more I think about it. Let's keep checking out some more sounds, though. What you're hearing there is the filter actually just self-resonating. So if I take that out, you can hear the noise. And then if I increase the resonance, you can hear that it can be tuned to the keyboard perfectly, and that creates that beautiful sound. Really just a beautiful sound. I sampled the factory patch version of this called Wind, as well as made a version of it that's a little bit more like a keyboard, a la the Iceland's patch in the Korg MS 2000. Little woodwind action. Crazy beats. I've been buying since really just for the past 4 years. But I've been working with synthesizers and as a professional mastering engineer for probably like closer to 15, something like that. Just always use software up until that point. I got sucked into the vintage rabbit hole. Yeah, so just really incredible sounds. And then this one, of course, you'll probably recognize this guy. Let me just turn off the reverb here. Let me just clear this so I can, here we go. There we go. And let's see. I just want to fix this in slightly. Sounds better like this. Sorry. Yeah, so that is the Blue Monday synthesizer sound. And if you guys didn't know, this is the very synthesizer that was used by new order to create Blue Monday. So I don't know why. A lot of people think it's a mini Moog or something like that, but no, in fact, it was the Source that they used. The song came out in 1983, production in 82, I think, and this synth came out in 81, which makes perfect sense. Welcome to the stream, Machine Storm. How are you doing? Blue Monday on a Wednesday. That's right. Yeah, so if you really, really, really love that song and want to get the actual authentic bass line sound, you can get pretty damn close with a mini Moog, but truthfully, if you want to get it perfect, it's going to have to be either buying one of these bad boys or buying my sample pack for $10 in the description. I'm sorry for selling out so hard. I just haven't had a chance to talk about the sample pack yet, and I wanted to get the word out there. So that's the last time I'll say that today. Crazy Beat says, that's cool, man. I love your videos. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Crazy. Bought a D50 and a PG off of your previous live stream. I really appreciate that you felt so inspired. I love that synthesizer so much, and I hope you make some really cool sounds with it. Stream Storm. So those are some sounds. Now we're going to continue to play the synthesizer because that's a lot of fun. That's probably the reason you came to the stream, is to hear some of the stuff. But I also want to go into some of the history and fun facts about the synthesizer. Here's one more cool sound I liked. This is the sound of the triangle wave detuned. Just a beautiful sound, and the way that the oscillators drift in and out of tune, of course. In fact, if you have perfect pitch and you're listening to this stream, it's probably driving you a little crazy because just like an original mini Moog, this thing struggles to stay in tune perfectly. It's not optimal. And that actually brings us to our first fun fact about this synth. So this metal enclosure actually serves a purpose. This synthesizer runs really hot compared to a mini Moog. And what they had found was mini Moogs were famous for going out of tune when you'd put them on stage because there's all the stage lights and everything. They'd heat up and they'd go out of tune. That's the way voltage controlled oscillators work. And so what's happening internally inside of the Moog Source is they've actually deliberately cranked the heat of the synthesizer up, which might sound crazy for a hardware synth. Like you probably would imagine you don't want it getting too hot. And that's true, but what it does is it maintains a more stable temperature, which allowed them to basically be able to get the tuning a lot more rock solid. So this synthesizer came out in 1981, and I don't know exactly who in the Moog company designed it, which is a shame. I did a lot of researching. If anyone in the chat knows, I'd love to know. And I'm happy that you enjoy the diodes and rust samples machines with a Waldorf Attract and Infiltrator layered in battery. I don't know what Infiltrator is. But at 1981, around that time, Robert Moog was no longer physically designing the synthesizers Moog was making. There were other people who were more in charge of that. And this would be one of the synths, along with synths like the Concert Mate, the MG1, the Rogue, the Prodigy, the Taurus. This came out right after the Taurus, which is the bass synth that was used by the guys in Rush, for instance. And in fact, one of the factory presets of this synthesizer is called Taurus, and it's basically the bassline sound that you would have gotten if you had bought a Taurus. This synth is pretty much well known for bassline sounds, and I think probably even more so than the mini Moog. And the reason is it was used by a lot of bands for bass. Obviously, it was used on tour for the Speak and Spell record from Depeche Mode. So the first Depeche Mode record, they use, I believe, a Prodigy for the bass line. Don't quote me on this. It's a fun fact, meaning it's not 100%, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I believe they used a Moog Prodigy for the bass line of Just Can't Get Enough in the studio, but live they wanted an instrument that had patch memory so they could change sounds easily, and so they went with a Source. This is absolutely one of the first synths to have digital patch memory. Of course, the Prophet 5 beat it by 3 years to have, in 1978, I believe, is the first microprocessor controlled synthesizer. This one uses a Zlog Z80, which is a very common microprocessor that was, I think, came out in 1976 or so, and was used in a lot of synths. Space Capsule, it could have been Herb Deutsch. I'm not sure. It could have been a few people, and I don't have the exact person that it was. So with that in mind, I didn't want to spread much more misinformation than I already tend to do on this stream. Kieran, welcome to the stream. How's it going? So this was the first Moog to have digital patch memory. Of course, it's almost like a trial run for the Memory Moog, which came out the year after, 1982. That was the first truly polyphonic synthesizer Moog put out. Of course, nowadays, the Moog Muse is coming out. It should be shipping soon. And as a note here, we're recording this video right after the wake of the Hurricane Helen tragedy that destroyed so much of Asheville, and Moog Music is located in Asheville. So just want to say our hearts go out to you if you were affected by the hurricane. It was a major tragedy, and just a horrible thing. Wanted to say that, hopefully not bring the mood down too far. But yeah, so this was the second to last synthesizer that Moog ever used. Yes, Devo used it, Jamie, that's correct. Van Hoch Sunflower, welcome to the stream. What's some other sounds we have in here? This sound is the Mini Moog lead sound. And what's going on that gives this sound its characteristic flavor is there was a mistake made when the designers of the original Mini Moog were putting it together, where they accidentally sent too much volume to the filter. And so it created all of these harmonics and, drove the filter really hard. And when they realized the mistake, they pulled the 18 decibels out of the filter, and everybody said it sounded worse because without that characteristic drivey, dirty filter sound, the Mini Moog just didn't have the same character. And so they've continued that legacy on with the Moog Source here, where you can drive these oscillators. So at about like 50%, these oscillators are going to feed. That's the sound of the oscillators, really not driving the filter too hard. But if we push them harder, you can already hear that we're starting to get some harmonics in there. You hear those like little dirty sounds. I mean, it's just beautiful, right? So yeah, when you push that filter really hard with a Mini Moog or a Source, you're going to get that dirty Moog sound. So what's so interesting about the Source to me sonically is that it sounds, it can sound really clean. It can sound really beautiful and balanced. When you look at the oscillator partials under a scope, they're like perfectly level. It's like a really great sounding oscillator sawtooth and all of that. But what's also interesting is that you can really push this thing and start to get a lot more bite and mid-range growl out of it than you would think. I mean, putting it more in the territory of something like the MS-20 or the Polyvox, where it's starting to really give you some crunch as opposed to just remaining clean like maybe some other vintage synths from the time. What else do we have to say about this? This was the first Moog synth to have a membrane panel. And in fact, when I was trying to look up what was the first synthesizer to have a membrane panel, this synth came up. So I can't guarantee there wasn't a synth that came out earlier than this that had a membrane panel. By the way, can I get some scum cheers in the chat? I'm going to be drinking this, but you can be drinking whatever you want. I just want to say thank you to everybody who makes Wednesday nights here on YouTube the place to be if you're into synthesizers. Can I get some scum cheers? Hell yeah. Oh, don't do it. Oh yeah. Little bastard tried to get away from me. Yes. Billy Bart, welcome to the stream. Thank you very much, Hypothesis. Yeah, so this may have been the first synthesizer to have a membrane panel. So if you're like deep into the vintage snob world, you might think to yourself that the death of the analog synthesizer came with the DX7 in 1983, the death of the interface, right? But this was 1981, and Moog was actually already figuring out how to cut costs, and they sort of felt like, hey, with patch memory, you can save your sounds. You don't need to program it on the fly, right? So the knobs and stuff aren't as important. You can sort of see the logic there, but of course we all know people love the knobs, and that's why these don't go for mini Moog prices, is because they don't have the knobs. That's the obvious thing about these. Yeah, we're gonna get a little buzz on. Yeah. Yes. Synthmade, welcome. So the membrane panel on this is immaculate. It's amazing. And from what I researched online, and of course you can only trust so much, but it sounds like for whatever reason, the manufacturing of these membrane panels was really, really good, and a lot of them have held up. So obviously membrane panels are sort of famous for being faulty, but this synth does not appear to be one of those synthesizers where the membrane panels go out as often as synthesizers like the Chroma Polaris or the AX80. I'm trying to think of a couple of other ones that are kind of famous for that. So that's something like that. Let's see what else is going on. These were built from 1981 to 1985, and they made about 7,000 of them. So comparing that to some other synthesizers I have that were less than 1,000 were made, say, for instance, they cranked out a pretty good number of these, which is surprising to me because they seem kind of rare. Like right now on Reverb, I think there was about 6 of them, including this one. I have this one up for sale. So yeah, definitely kind of funny that yeah, ARP Quadra has a membrane too. Oh, it's Synthpunk. Welcome to the stream, Synthpunk. How are you doing? So yeah, really excited, to kind of dig in with this guy and to have you help with the Legendary Synthesizer Test. But yeah, 7,000 seems like a lot considering, and it makes me think that a lot of people who have this synthesizer are not letting it go because you don't see them that often on Reverb, considering there were that many that were made. We were listening to the filter earlier. And it is that famous 24 decibel per octave ladder filter, the same one. Internally, this synthesizer is a mini Moog. It was intended to be the replacement. There are some differences in the architecture. So on a mini Moog, you've got 3 VCOs, and one of them can be used as an LFO. On this synthesizer, we have 2 VCOs and an LFO that's controlled by this mod wheel here. One thing that we can do with this synthesizer that's not possible on a mini Moog is use sample and hold. So we've got sample and hold right here. We have arpeggios. We have we have a sequencer. We can save our own patches, which aside from a memory Moog, this is the only vintage Moog you could do that with. Another thing is the sequencer, I want to say real quick, can have 2 64 real-time sequences held in memory. Now, I'm not a master of any sequencer, and we've done live streams on this before where we've tried recording stuff. It was pretty easy, but at the same time, I don't want to demo that because I'm not really the sequencer guy. I like playing them with my fingers. Yeah. Space Capsule, that is the nature of vintage synths, isn't it? Mike asked, why are you selling this one? What about it makes it not a keeper? There's a couple of things. We'll probably go through that as we go through the test. There's nothing wrong with it. I never really loved the Moog sound. Like, a lot of people are like real hardcore Moog sickos, you know, like, and I'm just like, I have all the respect in the world for Robert Moog and the company, and basically invented the synthesizer along with Buchla, you know, and it's obviously an extremely high quality instrument. You get that by feeling it, and this feel of this knob is incredible. I mean, it does sound good. For me, I like vintage polysynths, so this one isn't necessarily something I need to keep also just from that front. So yeah. So what else do we have? The white noise in the synthesizer. So let's turn off the resonance, open the filter all the way up. You can see it's very nice, easy to do this, not quite as fast as on a Mini Moog, but let's listen to the noise and really understand one of the Achilles heels of the synth. So this is a problem not just with this synth, but as well as the memory Moog. The noise is not analog. It's actually PCM based. And because, you know, RAM was freaking crazy expensive in 1981, it's a very short sample. And when you're listening to it, you start to notice that it's got this, what people call a heartbeat, where it repeats. It's got this cyclical nature. And once you've heard it, it will, you can't unhear it. And so that's an interesting thing. So this synthesizer, 7000 made from 81 to 85 when they went out of business. I want to talk a little bit about where this synth fits into the history of, and what was going on in the market of 1981. So Moog was in some ways lagging behind at this point. Digital had reared its head. There were a couple of synthesizers that were digital at the time, but they were very, very, very expensive. So for the average market, analog synthesizers were by and away still the only synthesizers that were affordable that could be taken on tour. And the problem is this synth came out 3 years after the Prophet 5, and 3 years is a long time in, you know, the 70s, 80s. When it comes to synth time, things happened really fast. And if synth manufacturers didn't like get up to speed within a year or two, they started to lag behind. Now there were instruments like the Oberheim OBX, I think came out in 81. The Roland Jupiter 8 came out in 81. Synthesizers, of course, the Prophet 5 had already been out for 3 years. So polyphonic synthesizers were on the market before, but again, they were very, very expensive. So the average musician probably couldn't afford one of those polyphonic synths, but they could maybe afford a monophonic synth like this and make music. But 81 was a rough year because something happened. Korg came out with the Poly 6, which was sort of to compete with the Jupiter 4, but it added a couple of more voices, one more voice than the Prophet 5. And it came out at a very low price, a similar price to the Source. And the, I believe that's correct. I could be wrong about that. We'll fact check some of the stuff. But considering what you got with 6 voices, with chorus, ensemble, a sub oscillator, a phaser built in, and then Roland comes out, claps right back with the Juno 6. So 1981, if you had to sort of define what it is about 81, what happened that year in the world of synthesis, I would say affordable polyphonic synths is what we're talking about. Those two synthesizers, and probably a couple of others that I'm not thinking of right now, were for the first time the average musician who made a lot of money at gigs could afford a polyphonic synth. 1980, wasn't really the case. The synths were really, really expensive. Eternian, welcome to the stream. Love that. OBX was 1979. Okay, so that's correct, Gerald. Sorry, I was off by a year. But my point being, talk about a, when in the world of really expensive analog legendary synths, it's the golden age of synthesis. The Moog Source sort of feels like it's trapped in the previous decade, right? Because it is essentially like a mini Moog. Now, for a lot of people, that's great. And especially if you want to buy a vintage mini Moog, I would severely consider a Source, which you can get for probably about a fifth the price of a vintage mini Moog, or you could buy the new one, right? Which they do sound great. Let's see. Chip synths really made affordable, and they still sounded great. Yeah, Parbs, I believe soon we are going to see more like 82. We're going to see all the manufacturers move away from proprietary ICs and move into chips. So it's sort of like its own thing. Vincent's been doing a series on his channel. Vincent Presley, I believe is the name. And he actually asked me to contribute some of my videos to his most recent episode. But he's been chronicling the different eras of synthesis. It's really a fun thing to check out if you're into synths. After you're done watching this video, so the algorithm doesn't think that you fucking hate me. David Lovering, welcome. That's awesome. Talk about a lot of extra control in there. The Poly 6 and the Juno 6, man, that was a rough thing for Moog. And they would clap back. They would finally release a polyphonic synth, a true polyphonic synth, because the Poly Moog was a string machine, really. It wasn't truly polyphonic. That is a filter per voice. They would release the Memory Moog in 82. Early Memory Moogs were a shit show. They released the Memory Moog Plus, I believe, the year later, but the damage had already been done. There's just... Moog was going downhill, and when the DX7 came out, man, it just really busted it. Just really fisted Moog. So those are some little bits of the history and the fun facts about this guy. Let's get away from that. Now, if we, on the topic of the noise, if we just listen to the noise real quick, but with the filter... Here would be sort of my litmus test, is I played this sound earlier in the stream. How many of you guys noticed the heartbeat back then? Because now that I've pointed out, you're not going to be able to not hear it. But if you don't know it's there, you sort of... Yeah, the original Memory Moogs were rushed. I don't know exactly where it was in the timeline as far as if the DX7 had come out yet, but they're rushed. And if you look up photos of a Memory Moog, internally, it's a fucking mess. I don't know how they decided to, ship it like that. So, of course, this was used for Blue Monday. It was also used by, I believe, ZZ Top for one of their records. Depeche Mode used it extensively on A Broken Frame, which was their sophomore record after Speak and Spell. They used it on tour, like I said, for Speak and Spell. Just Can't Get Enough. If you look up the video of them playing Just Can't Get Enough live, you'll see that they're using a Source. And again, that's because it had patch memory, which was novel at the time. I think Vince Clarke also got a Jupiter 4 for that reason, and later regretted it, being like, hey, I'm not gelling with that instrument. He doesn't seem to like polyphonic synths all that much. Space Capsule says, I want to know how to build that patch for my Matrix Brute. Well, I will actually show you how to do it. It's not super difficult. So I'm going to turn the cutoff up here all the way. And what's great is you guys can sort of see the knob's blocking the numbers a bit, but... So what we're listening to here, I'll turn my reverb off again because this is a bass sound. And putting reverb on a bass is an insane thing to do. We're really just starting with a sawtooth. detuned to taste. The loudness contour, which is just the amp envelope, all it is no attack, no decay, sustain all the way up. Right? So it's pretty much your most simple, basic synth sound, aside from having just one oscillator. So, and the critical thing is we are pushing that envelope. So again, I don't know if it's like 50, 60 on the increment control here. You're not really pushing the filter too hard, but if you have it cranked up to 99, yeah, it's going to be that. As we, I'm going to turn the contour amount down, which is the envelope depth in modern parlance. And so if we bring this down and we find kind of like the fundamental note, somewhere like around there, we've got a pretty good amount of resonance on here. Here's how it would sound without any resonance. And with the resonance, it sounds about the same because it's the bass line. What's happening with a ladder filter, I probably should have said this earlier, is when you crank the resonance on a ladder filter, you actually lose that bass. So that's something that sets the Moog synths at the time apart from other synths. Although I will say a lot of the early synths too did lose bass. So synths like the SH2, for instance, a very similar synth to this. So with the filter contour up, how does it feel? Right? And the filter contour is just, the no sustain, no attack, and the decay, you just got to find that right amount. You can get really snappy with the synth. This is at like 50%. Pretty snappy. All the way to the gate just opening. I would say like 50% on this synth is not enough. A little more probably gets you into that territory. If you go past that, that's going to be too much to get you that, famous, because especially when it starts to do the gallop, you want it pretty tight. That sort of thing, you need to have that. Broke Rabbit. Hell yeah, it is. That's actually why I have it, is because I wanted to get that mini Moog sound, see if it was for me. And the Source has the same components internally as a mini Moog, except for a couple of things like the noise source. But it's the closest thing to a mini Moog you can get. Yeah, so that's how you get that. Oh, you meant the MS2K sound. Yeah. So, yes, there is a mod. George Ray, welcome to the stream. There is a mod to swap out the noise chip because it was used in the memory Moog. I know Rosen Sound has it, so you can just buy it from them if you were going to do that. Yeah, Blue and Orange Wednesday. Yes, it does have this very Michael Bay movie color scheme. So really not too much of a thing, but as we crank up the resonance, you'll hear the difference. We lose a lot of that low end. So somewhere around 35. And of course, it's just, there's a million plugins that can get pretty close to this sound. It's not a particularly complicated sound, but there's something to overdriving that filter and that squelch, that growl, that mid-range bite I keep talking about, that really kind of sets this synthesizer apart, in my opinion. So yeah, used by Blue, New Order on Blue Monday, A Broken Frame by Depeche Mode. Gary Newman used this. Jan Hammer used this. Devo used it extensively. And for me and a lot of us, vintage industrial snobs, Front 242 used this for most of their bass lines on Geography, which was their debut record. They then moved on to like the emulators and the more digital sounding synths for their following records. But for this record, the first one, Geography, they used a Moog Source. So that's a really cool reason to get one of these too, if you're into EBM music like I am. So always fun about that. Excuse me. Now let's talk about the price. So I had to go do some digging. It was very hard to find what a launch price was. I found an article from 1982 that said it was selling for £895, which I believe, it's hard to convert 1981 or 1982 pounds to $1982. But if I did the math correctly, that would have been about $1,200 in US dollars in 1982. And if you adjust that for inflation, this is crazy. This synthesizer would have been selling for $5,250, which would have been, the article even called it expensive for the time, because again, when you compare it to other synths that were coming out around that time, if you can imagine spending over $5,000 on the Moog Source today, it does seem a little bit, you'd want a little bit more knobs or something for $5,250. Of course, Moog did reissue the Mini Moog for $5,000 recently. So, but that did have the knobs. It didn't have the noise, but it also didn't have a sequencer or arpeggiator, didn't have patch memory, did have MIDI. So, kind of win some, lose some. But even, but for back then, this was considered an expensive synthesizer for what it is. David says, comparing my Source to the Mini Moog, they are extremely close. The Source is slightly rawer, would never part with either. ZZ Top 2. Yeah, Eliminator. That was the name of the record or album that they used this for baseline. It's a reissue. Frontline Assembly used a Source. I didn't know that. That's my favorite of the industrial bands from the time. I don't think they were, I think I definitely misspoke earlier. They sounded really snappy. They're very good envelopes. I have some synths, or one synth that I don't like the envelopes of, and that's a very digital synth. So when you consider that this synth would have launched for a price of $5,250, more than the Mini Moog reissue with the really wonderful wood paneling and everything, it does feel a little rich. So the way I'm going to talk about prices for the used market, I'm going to do this in all future Legendary Synth streams, is I'm going to take the lowest third of good quality synths listed on Reverb. Now, when I say good quality, I mean the definition as Reverb defines the condition, which is to say that the instrument is in fine working order. That's their quote, but it could have some blemishes or something. So just like this synth has a couple of scuffs and stuff, you couldn't say it's mint. But good means there's nothing wrong. So when I'm talking about prices, that means no sticky keys, every button and function needs to work. And so even if someone lists, because often people will list shit as like, I saw a Fender Chroma Polaris and it was listed as excellent, and the first thing in the description is like the list of things that needs to get fixed on it. That's not excellent condition, right? So I'm going to make sure that when I'm speaking about price, that I'm not just looking at the prices and what the reported condition is on Reverb, but confirming in the description and visually too that it's a good condition synthesizer at least. So by taking the lower third of the good or better synth prices and averaging that out, you can expect to pay about $2,200 for a Moog Source today. And if you do the conversion there, that means this synthesizer's price has deflated by 58%. As we continue to do more of these legendary streams and build up sort of a pantheon of different synthesizers, classic synthesizers from back in the day, it'll be interesting to see how the prices devalue, like what the devaluation is for different synthesizers. I suspect this synthesizer has devalued less than other synths, but I could be wrong. So let's move on and talk about the reputation now. Let's get some more sounds, actually. I want to hear this thing. filter resonance on this one. So we've kind of heard the sawtooth, we've heard the triangle wave, we also have pulse width. So why don't we just check that out real quick? So I'll bring the cutoff all the way up here. And you can see that you could do a really slow filter sweep with this. Let's jump over to these pulse width waves. And then we can hear what they sound like individually. So we have control over the pulse width from 50 being in the center is the full square wave. You can hear that we can't go all the way through 0. But there's something so beautiful about the way the pulse sounds on this synthesizer. It's very, there's a way in which pulse waves can sound really harsh and biting and nasal. And this one, it just has that magic where it just always sounds harmonic and still very, it's never aggravating to the ear. One thing, we don't have any pulse width modulation, just like you don't have it on a mini Moog. I got into an argument with someone in the comments section of one of my other videos about whether or not I should say a synth doesn't have pulse width modulation, if it, meaning there's no automatic pulse width modulation. Of course, you can modulate the pulse by hand, but there's no way to modulate it with an LFO, which to me seems like the thing that we mean when we say PWM. But maybe for some people, I'm speaking a little bit inaccurately. I don't know. What do you guys think? That's kind of up to you. So I think that, of course, this synthesizer, it doesn't have the love because of the membrane panel, like you're saying, Billy Bart Cody. So that's definitely the biggest bad of the synthesizer. That and the PCM noise, which you can get replaced. No pulse width modulation, no knobs. Here's another thing that is worth saying to me from a modern context. This synthesizer is pretty dead simple. That's its strength and its weakness. It's not as simple as a Prodigy or a Rogue, but that has the knob, so you can, tweak it live. But all three of those synths in particular, to me, sort of seem like a family of stripped down Moogs where they sound great, but that's all they are, is they're only going to give you those types of sounds. It's not the type of synth that has a trick up its sleeve. And I think for some people, in a modern context, even if you love Moog, it might be a little bit underwhelming for that sense. For me, because I'm lucky enough to have a bunch of synthesizers, poly synths, digital synths, analog synths, vintage synths, modern synths, this has a very special place in my heart for that reason. But I think for other people, you might turn this on, and I'm not going to say it's going to sound any worse than a mini Moog. I think it's going to sound really great. Someone was saying earlier that it actually sounded rawer. So, but considering that, you're going to get a lot of sounds that are like a detuned waveform through a ladder filter. And that is what LFO, we've got triangle, we've got square. We don't have, a whole lot else. We can use sample and hold, I believe, if I hold. Yeah, so you get pretty insane there. So I guess that's a little bit of a trick up its sleeve. Certainly something that the Source can do that the Mini Moog can't. So talking about some of the good here for a bit is, again, I already talked about the overdriving the filter. That's a major reason that you want to get a Mini Moog or a synth that lets you do that. And, I just love that sound. Of course, I'm a industrial musician, so I'm going to like anything that has a little bit of edge. But even for those of you guys who like really clean music, it still adds so much harmonics and warmth to the sound when you can overdrive the filter. Another really great thing is the construction on this feels very premium. So I understand why people love Moog in the sense that this thing is like built like a tank. It's literally metal. It feels like it could take a bullet pretty well. Just a really premium feeling instrument, especially this dial. So I think I mentioned it kind of briefly earlier, but alpha dials, as they were called, when the Alpha Juno came out and it just had a dial for entering stuff. Pretty hated by most synth snobs. Can I get some scum snobs in the chat? But this one is unique among all of the alpha dials. It uses, I think, magnets, some sort of floating magnet technology, but it's a continuous knob and it feels like it's kind of floating and it's really heavy and has like a grit to it, and it moves very smoothly, super smoothly. Oh, I love to see it. I love to see it, you guys. Yeah. Alpha type dials def make knobless synths worth. Yeah, so it's a thing. This one, because it's pre-MIDI, the resolution is really great. You could do a nice slow filter sweep, all of that sort of thing. I have a lot of fondness in my heart for this type of layout. It's very easy. The membrane panel, it's literally like you want to turn sync on, you just press the button, you turn it off, turn which oscillator you want. Oh my gosh. Come on, Daddy. Let's get it together. It's very easy to control. You don't need to worry about that. And I love the paint job. I love that it looks like something out of Miami Vice or a Michael Bay movie. I think it's actually beautiful, but we'll see how it does in the Legendary tests, which I think it's time for us to get over there and get going with that. So I'm very excited for this. So let me explain how this is going to work, you guys. First off, let me jump in and let's get some music going here. So I'm going to just bring in some tracks. And where are we here? Let's get some music in the background while we're talking about synths. So what we're going to do is we've got 11 tests that the members of this channel and I have come together and worked on that's a little loud. I'm going to just turn it down just a little bit more. Thank you for bearing with me. We've come up with this test of 11 questions to see if this synthesizer is going to pass. And let me just pull up the chat too here. So the way this will work is I'm going to ask the question and then I'm going to post the poll in the chat. So you guys are going to decide with me whether or not this synthesizer passes or fails each one of these tests. So there's no halfway. The reason I think this makes more sense in a weird way, I was inspired by the FYA podcast, by the way, if you guys are interested. They do something like this, but for theme park rides. Worth checking out. Really entertaining podcast. But Ed from Earth, welcome to the stream, by the way. The reason is because I feel like we could all go down the path of like giving the Wave Station a 0.56 point score as far as rating the presets or whatever. And that seems accurate. But I actually think it's more accurate to have to either pass or fail something. Like full-throated say, does it pass this test or not? So I'm going to give you guys a minute from the first test. And when you guys vote, whatever the majority is, pass or fail, that'll award half a point, and then I award the other half a point. So we're going to come up with, it can score 0, half a point, or a full point per question test. The last question scores 2 points. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. If you guys had any questions, feel free to ask. This is a great time, by the way, to refresh your browser and make sure that you're up to speed, because if you've gotten a couple ads or something, you might be 30 seconds behind. And because I'm only going to wait a minute, I want you guys to make sure you get your responses in. So yeah, it's like the Electoral College a little bit. So the first question, we're going to write it into the, here we are, is the John Hammond test. And the way this works is, how innovative is the synthesizer? Did it move synthesizer technology forward, or was it derivative of previous synths? I'm gonna just grab my phone out here and start a minute timer on my phone. So we're starting a little late. You guys got a couple extra seconds there, but we're going to see what you guys think. And so the spirit of this test, or of this one in particular, is what we're trying to ascertain here is, as we go through a lot of these classic synthesizers, we want to make sure that they that we're rewarding synths that actually took the risk to do something new. I think sometimes it doesn't pay off and we'll punish them in other tests for it. But in this case, I think for a synthesizer like this, we want to be able to say, okay, was this a step forward or a step backward for synthesizers? And we've got 13 seconds. I'm going to reveal what I think. Sometimes I might be able to say right away what I think. But sometimes I'm going to work it out live with you guys, what I think. But you guys are stuck with what you had to say. I'm ending the poll, and 73% of you said it was a pass, and I too think it was a pass. So the Moog Source is off to a good start with 1 full point for saying that it passed the John Hammond test. So let's move on to the next question. The next test is the training day test. Shout outs to 40 Thieves for the name. And we're going to call this the training day test is, here we go, let me just get it into the chat here. And here we go, real quick. Let's start it. The training day test. How easy would a beginner find this synthesizer? Can you tweak the sounds directly from the front panel? That is the question. How easy would a beginner find the synthesizer, and can you tweak sounds directly from the front panel? Now, because this is the first time we're doing it, I'm going to think this one out loud a little bit with you guys. And I want to know what you guys think, for sure. Obviously, that's why we're doing this way. But when it comes to a synth like this is actually pretty easy to tweak from the front panel. That is to say, there's like no menu diving or anything. But how easy would a beginner find this synth? That gets a little more complicated, because obviously if it had all the knobs and everything, that would make it quite easier. Machine Storm says it's literally tech from a previous synth. Innovative. I'm going to give it the pass. I should have justified that for the John Hammond test. I'm giving it the pass because it was the first Moog to have digital memory. It was the first membrane panel synth ever, which, like it or not, did start a trend. It may very well have been the first membrane panel synth. I'm not 100% sure about that. It had digital sample and hold. It had a lot going on for it. I could see an argument, though, Machine Storm, playing devil's advocate, that it's all stuff other companies had done up to this point. We're going to end the poll. How easy would a beginner find this synth? You guys said 75% said yes, and 25% said no. And so we're going to give it 1.5 out of 2, because I'm going to go ahead, and I might change my mind on this at some point, but I don't think this synth is quite easy enough for a beginner to get their head around. And actually the reason is because of this. We do kind of have a layer of shift where we've got level 1 control, level 2 control. It's all laid out, but as far as running the sequencer and everything, I'm still a little confused by, I mean, I guess it's as simple as like record 1, record 2, play 1, play 2. But then we also have program, sequence, record, play. And it's very easy to get lost with this orange row here. So it's kind of the orange section that's giving me this feeling that this isn't exactly the most beginner-friendly synth. In its price range for vintage synths, if you want a Moog, I would say the Prodigy and the Rogue would pass the test. This one for me doesn't exactly, doesn't pass the test for me. So we're at 1.5 out of 2, which is still pretty good. So we're going to move on to the next test here. And let me drop it in. Let's start a poll. This is a lot of fun. I'm really excited to hear what everybody thinks about doing this test, especially because, we're contributing to this together. So the next test is the Daniel Day-Lewis test. Can the synthesizer deliver a world-class expressive performance? Does it feel fully featured with the likes of Velocity, Aftertouch, arpeggiator, sequencers, or MPE? Now, of course, this test is going to be somewhat dependent on where it's at in time, but I deliberately wrote this question this way. And the reason is because for me, a synthesizer like this, or, consider something like the Jupiter 8, doesn't have Velocity and Aftertouch. I think we need to rate it off of how useful it is today, right? With the likes of synths, like the Polybrute 12, the Super Gemini, does this synthesizer stack up necessarily? Was that just the end of the music there? Oh, I see what happened. Let's go ahead and just keep playing music. That would be smart. So, of course, there'll be other tests that are more based off of where it's at, but 89% of you said it passes. It delivers a world-class expressive performance. And so what that means is the synthesizer now has 2 out of 3 points, because I am going to say that it would fail in my book. I just don't think that the mod wheel and pitch bend is enough to justify it. It does have a sequencer and arpeggiator. Yes, it does. For me, though, and I understand this is my bias. That's part of why we're doing it with my bias in mind, but also the bias of everybody who watches this channel. For me, I need a little bit more than just a sequencer and pitch and mod wheels to deliver a truly expressive performance. Velocity and Aftertouch, I think, pretty much need to be there. There are some exceptions. Other synthesizers, for instance, a pitch wheel that also can control the filter, that can go a long way. A pitch wheel that can tune to sevenths or fifths easily, or thirds easily, right? A little bit there. George Ray says the keypad plays really well. 40 years later, parts still available. I agree with that. That's for sure. Bliskin, I do agree that play it out pretty nicely. So, yeah, Dubstation Zero failed it as well as I did. So, yeah, that's the thing. For me, I need a little bit more than just, it's not quite enough for me to be able to go with just that. So, next up, we have the Roy Batty test. Was the synthesizer built to last? Does it have any known common problems? So we're going to go ahead and drop that in the chat. So, yeah, for me, I just need a little bit more. I feel like if we pass this synth today, every fucking synth is going to pass, because this is a pretty minimal thing. I can't think of any synthesizers in this room that wouldn't pass based off of that. I mean, like, maybe the MS-20, but even the MS-20, it's only got the mod wheel, but you can route it to all sorts of shit. Like the patch bay sort of makes it where you don't really need that, and all of the tweaking can be done on the live panel. With this, doesn't really give you that tweakability either. So for me, that's not a thing. But the question we're doing right now is, the Roy Batty test. Was the synthesizer built to last? Does it have any known common problems? Is the Polyvox built to last? It's pretty tough. But I was talking about the expressivity of the thing. So here we go. So ending the poll, 83% of you said it was built to last, and I agree. So now it's going to be 3 out of 4. So it's doing pretty good, right? I think it's doing pretty good. We love a good wooden panel. So now we're going to do the aliens from Signs test. So if any of you guys have seen the movie Signs, you might know what this is about. But here we go. Does this synthesizer have an Achilles heel? Are there any major features missing from this synthesizer? So for me, I can say pretty clearly which way I'm going to vote based off of one thing, or actually two things, which will probably give you a hint to the fact that I do think this synth has an Achilles heel. But I want to know what you guys think. Currently, it's at a 100% fail. We'll see. Does the synthesizer have an Achilles heel? I think we're probably all going to be in agreement there, it's seeming. But overall, the Moog Source is doing pretty good. 3 out of 4. The final score is going to be a number out of 12, right? And is it waterproof? Yeah. This is a fun looking at. Yeah, I mean, I think it was built to last for sure. But if the membrane fails, you have a brick. So that maybe it's a little tough there. So 100% of people said it failed, and I agree that it fails this. I'm going to fail it for 2 reasons. I think the PCM noise is a major issue because, if I'm correct, the Prodigy doesn't have noise, but this has, I don't know that I love the noise in this. I'd probably use a different synth for that type of sound that doesn't have that problem. So with that in mind, that's a major Achilles heel to me. And then the other Achilles heel is, of course, with a Moog, you want to have knobs, and this doesn't have knobs. So, or it's got 1 knob, 2 knobs. It's got the volume knob and 1 knob for everything else. So I think that's the definition of an Achilles heel. I thought about leaving that out, but that test out. But I've noticed there was a couple of synths that I thought that really applied to, and in this case, this was definitely one of them. So up next, we have the Elvira test, named after the most beautiful mistress of the dark. Everyone knows the most important part of how a synthesizer sounds is how it looks. Does this synthesizer look good? Is it a world-class synthesizer in terms of looks? And I could see this one going either way because it is a very divisive paint job. Some people hate the way this synthesizer looks. I'm partial to it myself, but I think for a lot of people, this synth is just too eye cancerous to take seriously. And I understand that. I think at the time it was probably very in vogue, but especially depending on where you were at in history and what kind of aesthetic you're going for. I mean, I might have trouble showing up to a goth show and playing this. I wouldn't, because I'd love that it has this sort of quirky paint job, but I could see a lot of people being like, yo, it just doesn't look like a classy synthesizer. But it turns out that 67% of you think it does, and I think it does too. So we're going to go for 4 out of 6. I think that's the proper thing, right? We're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 6 tests so far. And so it's doing pretty good. We're at a 2/3 score, and that we're in a good standing for halfway through. But we'll see how it does overall. So next up, we have let's see here. I'm going to have to delete both of these. So we're doing the Dale Cooper test. So the Dale Cooper test from Twin Peaks is, how versatile is this synthesizer? Can it cover the sonic ground of bass, leads, pads, and textures, or does it have a limited sonic palette? Conversely, does it attempt to do so much that it excels at nothing? So when I proposed this, I didn't have that last sentence in there, and I believe it was Dubstation Zero who pointed out that like there's also synths like the Romplers of the 90s are the best example of this, where they do so many different sounds, workstations and things like that, but they don't do any particular sound amazing, right? So that would fail this test. And then another thing that might fail this test would be, something that is a one-trick pony. For instance, a very legendary instrument, the ARP Selena, it's basically good for one thing, right? It might score, it might pass every other test, but a string machine's not versatile enough to do basses and everything else. So it looks like 73% of you say it's a pass, and I am sadly going to fail it. And here's my justification for that. I think if it had the PCM noise, or it had analog noise, you could do a lot of like techno percussion with it that would sound really cool. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to oversell the noise thing, because I think, when you're listening to it in tracks, you don't really notice it, right? But it's there. It's something I have to talk about when we're trying. I want to be as objective as I can when it comes to this test. And I think that it's probably a little bit, I might be coming across as a little bit harsh, but I want to protect the sanctity of the test, because we're going to be testing a lot of synthesizers this way. And to me, it's very important, to make sure that it has integrity. And I just don't think this synth, I kind of buried the lead with this when I said, like, it only does what it does. It's not quite as versatile as I'd like it to be. There's synthesizers that make me go, ooh, this is a cool sound that only this synth can do. And I just don't think that this synthesizer is necessarily that. It doesn't mean it's bad. I think it's a wonderful synth. But is it necessarily that? Let's see here. We're moving on to the next test. And this one is called the Nostromo test. So the Nostromo test is, how intuitive is the interface? Can all the parameters of the synth be accessed directly from the front panel? Is it easier to use a programmer or editor? So for me, if a synthesizer, if it's easier to use an editor to use a synth, then it would fail, right? A synthesizer like the Matrix 6 would fail this straight out, right? But even other synths that have interfaces, like for instance, to use a modern synth, the Korg wave state, right? A lot of people find it easier to use the editor than it is to use the front panel. So this is sort of in tandem with the training day test, reviewing the interface. This one is more like, is the interface good for getting the shit done? Is it too, so not necessarily if a beginner could get it, but I'm assuming all of us synth sickos out there, could we understand it? And is it fast? Can you get there quickly? And 58% of you say it's a fail. And so this is interesting. This is the first time I actually think it's a pass, but you guys think it's a fail. So we're going to make that 5 out of 8. And here's why I think it's a pass, but I understand why you guys out there voted to fail it. It's what I think Parb said it earlier. It's laid out, like you can follow what's going on. You've got your filter controls, your filter envelope, amp envelope, mixer, oscillator controls, LFO, like it's all very simple. This is a little funky, but this is where on this test, I'm not rating it for beginners. I'm rating it for, not even synth sickos like yourselves, but like the intermediate synth enthusiast, right? Level 1, level 2, it's all laid out. It's actually pretty easy to get through. It's not that bad. Would I recommend it for a beginner? Probably not. It's just a little bit of a bitch to go through that. So yeah. Sometimes a synth lost in the mix creates a unique sound in itself. Yes, I agree with that. Could a T-Rex reach all the controls? FS1R would fail. I love a software editor for something like the Matrix 6, but it would fail that test. That's kind of the idea of this test is, or barrage of tests is, how do these synths do compared, and not all synths are going to be able to pass all the tests. And what the goal is to get an objective way to talk about synths and to rate them. So the next question, the next test is the Deep Space 9 test. How deep are the modulation possibilities? Does this synthesizer have enough complexity to keep sound designers drooling, right? So I want to make sure I'm super clear about this. Does this synthesizer have enough modulation possibilities to keep sound designers drooling? Meaning, if you're now it's like expert level. We're not talking about the interface anymore. We're talking about the architecture, right? We're talking about, with all menu diving, in this case, no menu diving, but like if we're talking about the JD800 or something, a synthesizer has a lot of menu diving. Does it have that modulation depth to it where you find new sounds, right? Where it surprises you, go, oh, I didn't realize I could do that. That's what this test, the spirit of this test is. Does this synthesizer have enough going on that it's going to keep a sound designer interested? So this is almost like the inner test. And 75% of you guys said, no, it doesn't. And I agree, it does not. What we have in terms of modulation is basically a triangle or square wave routed to the filter or the oscillator. We have sample and hold on the filter. And other than that, we've just got the contour. So this is like the definition of a synth that fails the Deep Space Nine test, because, does this synthesizer have that, there's no pulse width. Pulse width dilation. Can't morph like Odo. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Like, does it have that morphing, sort of a thing? So we're moving on to the next test here. I think we're all in agreement that one was pretty much, it just doesn't have enough, unfortunately. So the next test is the Han Solo test. Has this synthesizer aged like a fine wine? If it's a new synthesizer, will it become a future classic? If it's a vintage synthesizer, is it perceived better nowadays than it was at the time of release, or was it a legendary synth? So there's certain synthesizers. Jupiter 8 was loved when it came out, and it's loved today. Other synthesizers, for me, like Chroma Polaris would be one of those, where at the time people weren't that interested in it. But today, I think it's there. And to be honest with you, as I'm thinking about this question, I'm not 100% sure what I think is the answer. I'm going to have to think about it for a second. Let me see, where did I had a list of, it's somewhere in here. All right, so what do we say? 56%, making it the closest poll so far, said that it passed. And I got to think about it. I'm not 100% sure what I think. It's tough. It's a tough thing. I think that it's tough because for me, yes, it would pass. Because I think this synthesizer is a really great bargain for if someone wants a mini Moog and they don't want it to basically be compromised. Like, this is a mini Moog for all intents and purposes. Yeah, it's got the PCM noise. I know I've made a big deal about that earlier, but this isn't the test for that. This is saying, like, taken as a whole, has this synthesizer, has it aged well? That's my opinion. Objectively, though, I think a lot of people don't think this synth often gets thrown into that category of synthesizers that, are like thought of as lesser synths in some way or another. Machine Storm said, I wanted it to fail so bad. I'd be curious to know, did you fail it though? Or did you not? So, yeah, let's see here. I think I'm going to pass it. And here's the rationale. I think I'm going to pass it. I'm working through this live. I didn't run this in through the test ahead of time. I wanted to do it. I think for a lot of the questions, it was pretty easy for me to go for it. But I think that the thing about it is this synth still commands more money. People still spend more money on on this than a Prodigy or a Sword or a Rogue, right? So I think by that logic, I can make the argument, and maybe I'm delusional here. The way it works, Vulture Mom, is you guys assign half a point and I assign half a point. That's how it works. Sorry if it's confusing. We'll get used to it as we do more of these streams. But Dubstation asks, did I hear you say the sequencer can change patch per step? That would change my answer on a lot of these. No, it cannot wave sequence. This is not that deep. Oh, you actually passed it. You wanted it to fail so bad, but but you passed it, and I think that's where I'm at too. So we're going to give it a 6 out of 10 because I think it does pass. It still commands a price above the Prodigy and the Rogue, which do have the knobs and are very, very similar. Yeah. George Ray says it can change patch per step. Per step patch change? Really? Are you sure about that, George? That seems a little I know there's mods of the synth, but that seems pretty intense. In which case, that might change something. So we're moving on to the last test here, guys. I was not aware that it could, but I don't know everything. That's part of the fun of doing these live on the internet. Sometimes you learn something. So the next test, the final question, the 11th question, you guys assign a point, I assign a point. It's the Vangelis test. Okay, I just got to edit it down here. Here we go. The question is, do the raw oscillators and filters of the synthesizer have that magic? Is the synthesizer expressive? Does it need effects to sound good? Probably could take is the synthesizer expressive out of there. I think that's better covered over in the what was it, the Daniel Day-Lewis test. So this question, and I'll let it go a little bit longer just so I can clarify it a bit. This question is ultimately a question about the sound, because there's going to be synthesizers that we cover on this channel that do not have legendary sound, and that's the way you got to think about this, or really about every one of the questions. To pass it, you got to say, it's pretty fucking good, right? Doesn't have to be maybe legendary, but it needs to be good. There's certain synths that for me, I didn't resonate with the sound all that well. So let's see what people are saying. Whoa, this is interesting. Do the raw oscillators and filters of the synthesizer have that magic? Does it need effects to sound good? I'm very surprised by how everybody's voting right now. Oh, wait. Never mind. For some reason, it looked like the opposite. I thought it was going sure about that. Yes, and the last question does count double dubs. So instead of 1 point, it counts for 2. Meaning we're going to end up with a score of X out of 12 because this last one scores double. When I'm finishing this beer off, can I get some scum cheers in the chat? It's been a lot of fun. I know we're going to work on getting this format streamlined a little bit, but I think this is going to be a really cool way, because at the end of this, we're going to have a list of all of the synthesizers we've ever checked out on this channel. And in that list, we're going to end that poll. 92% of you agree with me that this synthesizer passes the test, meaning that it's got 8 of 12 points. All right, so we got a couple of things to think about when it comes to this synth. So the first thing is 11 points or more is a legendary synthesizer. So you got to get 11 points to get to there. I think it's got to be that good, right? Then the next category down, if you get 8 to 10 points, that is a distinguished synthesizer. So the Moog Source, not quite legendary, but a very distinguished entry into the pantheon of synthesizers. Moving down from that, we've got 5 to 7 points. That's a garden variety synthesizer. It's aight. That's how I'm calling it, the aight category. You know, it's aight. It's okay. It's not legendary. It's not distinguished. Legendary is reserved for synths that can get 11 points or higher. Of course, we could have ended with a 0.5 or something like that. Let's see here. Voodoo Ranger, 9%. That's awesome. Parb said, just thinking out loud, do you think we could rate each test from 1 to 5? Because I've been really on the fence with a few of these. So I thought about doing it that way, Parbs. And here's my rationale for why I decided not to do that. Although I could see it, and maybe we'll go back and we'll adjust some things. But I think that it's really easy to get stuck in like, I'd give it a 3 out of 5, right? And we might end up with a lot of scores that are just like, it's kind of good over here, it's not so good over there. I kind of like the fact that you have to commit. No throat clearing, this synth passes, or it doesn't, right? And I think in a weird way, it's like, it's less accurate in the sense that, like, of course, the more resolution you have, the more you could rate it on a scale of 10 or a scale out of 100, right? It's going to have more resolution. But I also think there's something we said for, like, this one just doesn't pass X, Y, or Z test. And so we have to just get rid of that point altogether. And I know some of these are on the fence, but that's good. I think it's good to have a synth that's you're on the fence about and go, okay, I'm going to go ahead and fail it on that one. I just don't think it gets over the hurdle. So yeah. The questions are definitely subjective, and it's hard to be specific. Yeah, no, I mean, I understand. I think that it's up to you guys to use your best judgment on these questions because, you know, if with something like the Elvira test, of course it's subjective, right? Do you think the synth looks pretty? That's what the question is. And for some people, you know, they're going to be thinking to themselves like, well, I do think it's pretty. Some people said no. But that's also a way in which we get an interesting score is how many people overall think is that. Yeah. Dubstation Zero said, I was on the fence with a couple and voting ended before I voted, and I'm okay with that. And that's also a very good point, Nick, where it's like, hey, you know what? You kind of got to know what you think about it. And I struggled on the one. Which one was the one that I struggled on? What was it? The Han Solo test, which surprised me. I wasn't expecting to get caught up on that one. So on that test, I wasn't sure. And maybe I would have abstained from voting because I would have been like, oh, it's tough. It's tough. Also, I want to know, guys, is a minute enough time? Do I need to go for 2 minutes? Kind of short, only insofar as that if I don't keep it short, this stream could get kind of like boring in the interim while we're waiting. I feel like most people a minute should be enough time, but if it needs to be a minute 30 or 2 minutes, you guys let me know, okay? So I hear what you're saying, Uncle Jerry, but at the same time, I do think it's very important to be able to talk critically about synthesizers because people spend a lot of money on hardware synths. They spend a lot of hard-earned money on hardware synths, whether they be modern or vintage. I intend on covering modern synths and vintage synths with enough time on this channel in this format. This is the first synth we're covering. I'm going to try to get a stream in for members of this channel where we talk about the synths I've sold. So that stream won't really cover the history of the synths or the sounds because I don't have them anymore. We'll just go through and barrage all of the synths that I've sold. That way we have something in there. Quick game is a good game. I agree. Yeah. 1 minute work great. Okay, cool. I'm happy that, yeah. Barb said you were putting the questions up before you explained exactly what you meant, and I jumped the gun a couple of times. Yeah, I hit the send on the poll as I was saying it, and I guess that because of you probably get the poll almost instantly, but it takes a little bit of time. Yeah. So with that in mind too, we need to do a little math here. So this synthesizer, the street price is let's see here. The street price is $2,200 and it got 8 points. So what that means is you're paying $275 per point of legendary value. So this will also be something, we're going to have a separate chart where we can look at what synthesizers score the best value, as opposed to just rating the synthesizer independent of price, right? We're also going to have a chart, again, when we've reviewed more synthesizers, that will be able to tell you like, oh, this synthesizer, you got to pay $300 per point. And then this one, you only have to pay $150. That's a pretty good deal. Uncle Jerry's World, I'm very happy that you like this channel. Hypothesis says 1 minute's enough. Just explain the question before posting the poll. That's what I should do in the future. So that's what I'm definitely going to do from now on. Jota P, welcome to the stream. I can only use soft synths because they're super expensive here in Argentina. Well, a beautiful thing is that I sampled this synthesizer for you guys. I put the link in the description. I'm going to pin a comment as well. And I've sampled the 15 factory patches. I made the Blue Monday patch, the baseline patch that was used in the New Order song Blue Monday from 1983. And then I made 9 other patches. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I tweaked and made a few other patches. There were actually some really cool patches that were already on the synthesizer from the previous owner that I'm presuming the previous owner made. And I happen to know that the previous owner of the synthesizer has passed away. Sadly, I bought the synth from someone who inherited it. And so there's something really beautiful to me about saving that person's patches in a sample pack for the world to have. So the link's in the description. It's $10. I try to keep all my products super cheap so that everybody can afford them. And there's something really beautiful about, that his patches will live on. I tweaked them a little bit just because, like, say, for instance, a short patch isn't as great for a sampler. You can always shorten things in a sampler with a filter and an amp envelope. So it's nice to have, like, longer stuff, or just brought up the sustain a little bit, sometimes for, like, the filter envelope and stuff. But a lot of his patches, like that triangle lead we were playing earlier, that was his patch. The really cool sort of fifth sounding thing, that was his patch. I called it Tortured Robots in the sample library. So I really think it's a cool thing to have immortalized what he created with this instrument. And I didn't realize they weren't the factory patches when I've demoed this synth before because they sounded so good. I've actually talked on this channel before about how good the factory patches were in this. And I programmed in the factory patches for, austerity's sake, because I thought, well, it should have a sample pack of the synth should have the factory patches, but they were nowhere near as good as his. So, yeah. It just shows up in the, I actually want to disable the Stream Elements bot. It shows up there, but it's kind of annoying me. I want to get it out of there. Yeah. Fun at first, but I want to run into them at the show, at the Stowe. Yeah. So. Oh, that's really cool. GS is from Argentina. I didn't know that. That's awesome. So yeah, in conclusion, we've come to rating the Moog Source as a distinguished synthesizer. It is not quite legendary, but it is got a very good score of 8 out of 12. you know, half a point away from being an aight synthesizer, so kind of at the bottom end of distinguished, right? But still a really cool synthesizer, and $275 per point. So if you think about it, if the synthesizer cost the same, but it had scored 12 points, right? It would only cost $183 per point. So when we have the chart of all the synths, it's going to be the synth with the lowest price will be the winner, right? Yeah. And I think it's cool. And for me, I mean, one advantage of using the patches or sampled patches is it can be polyphonic. And that's a really cool thing. And that's like how I did the demo. The demo was all samples of the source and then just the lead I played live, right? So that's really cool. It sounds great. It's awesome at bass lines. It's awesome at leads. And it could do some pretty mean pads too when you use the samples polyphonically. So 425 samples, 25 patches, 25 sound fonts. It's about a gig altogether, and it's $10. I think that's a great value. So with all of that, I just want to say thank you guys for being here for our inaugural Legendary Synthesizer stream. I hope you guys liked it. Please let me know what you think in the comments if you're watching this from the future. I really appreciate you guys making it so far. For me, this has been something I've been working on a while to get this going. And what we're going to do, I should have said this too, as we do more synths, we will take samples of all of those synths and put them into the Legendary Synth sample pack library. So eventually I'll have up on the vultureculture.live site a product where once you've bought it, you get all the future samples that we put into it from all the synths that I've had. And if we ever get some synths, some new stuff in here, we'll put those synths samples in there too. So there will be samples from everything I own in there, which is something people... oh yes, and while we're closing it out, definitely want to say this week's recommendation for Scum member music is Dubstation Zero at Kate Sessions Park. Oh my god, awesome modular set. If you're one of those fucking people who thinks modular isn't for musicians, his set will be the thing that makes you go, yep, it is. It's absolutely musical. It's an awesome set. Just search Dubstation Zero, Kate Sessions. It'll pull up pretty quick. Already 4,000 views, doing really good. So that was fun. Glad you subbed. Thank you for subscribing, Space Capsule. So with that, I'm looking forward to seeing you guys next week. We've got a really cool stream. I'm currently embargoed from telling you what it is. But that day, a new product will launch, and I will be able to compare it to the vintage hardware. I think that's the most I could say about it. With that, guys, continue to be excellent, and I will see you in the next video.